Welcome back to Jamyy English. I'm Jayz.
And I'm Amy. All month we have been telling our stories in English, the good parts, the meaningful parts, the parts we are proud of.
Today we talk about the parts that were harder.
Mistakes, failures, the things that did not go the way we planned.
This might seem like an unusual topic for an English learning podcast, but in English conversation, being able to talk about your failures with honesty and perspective is one of the most powerful things you can do.
It is also one of the things that learners find most difficult, not the grammar, the willingness.
Because in many cultures, admitting failure is uncomfortable. It can feel like weakness or loss of face.
But in the kind of English conversation we are preparing you for, the ability to talk about what went wrong and what you learned is a marker of maturity and self-awareness.
It makes you interesting, it makes you trustworthy, and it creates real connection.
Because everyone has failed, and most people are grateful when someone else admits it first.
Let's start with the language of failure itself. English has many words in this area, and they carry different weight.
A mistake is usually smaller, something you did wrong that could be corrected or learned from. I made a mistake in the presentation. I had the wrong figures.
A failure is larger, a goal that was not achieved, an attempt that did not succeed. My first business failed within 18 months.
A setback is something that slowed your progress or pushed you backward but did not end the journey. I had a setback when the project was canceled, but I found another path.
A regret is something you look back on with the wish that you had done differently. My one real regret is that I did not spend more time with my grandfather before he died.
Each of these words does slightly different work. Knowing which one to use tells the listener what you are communicating.
Let's talk about professional failures first because they are often the ones people are most willing to share.
I had a major client project go badly wrong in my third year as a freelancer. I had taken on more than I could handle without being honest with myself about the scope I delivered late. The work was not my best. The client was unhappy and did not come back.
What happened after?
I sat with it for a few weeks. I went back through every decision I had made on that project and tried to understand where each one went wrong. I found 3 specific patterns agreeing to times I knew were too tight.
And what changed?
I changed how I scope projects. I built in buffer time that I did not advertise to clients. I became much more willing to say, I need more time for this to be done properly. It was a painful lesson, but it genuinely made me better.
That narrative has a clear structure. What happened, what you did to understand it, what specifically changed, that is the anatomy of a well-told professional failure story.
And notice that Amy never blamed the client or external circumstances. She owned the decisions.
Ownership is what makes a failure story credible. If you describe a failure that was entirely someone else's fault, it is not really a failure story, it is a complaint.
Useful phrases for owning failure. Looking back, the problem was my decision to blank. I underestimated blank and that was on me. I did not ask for help when I should have. I ignored signals that were telling me something was wrong. I knew it was not right, but I convinced myself it would be fine.
My professional failure story: I took a teaching job at a school that was not the right fit because the salary was higher than my previous position. I knew within 3 months that something was wrong. The culture, the administration, the approach to students. It did not align with anything I believed about teaching.
What did you do?
I stayed for 2 years before I finally left because I was afraid of uncertainty, of giving up the security. I kept telling myself it would get better, and it did not. When I finally left, it was an enormous relief, and I could not understand why I had waited so long.
What did it teach you?
That security without alignment is its own kind of loss. I had the salary, but I was depleted every single day. After I left, I took a job that paid less and felt like myself again immediately. I've never made the same trade since.
Security without alignment is its own kind of loss. That is the take-o, and it is genuinely wise.
Lessons you pull from your own failures always carry more weight than lessons you read about.
Useful phrases for the lesson part of a failure story. What it taught me was blank. I understand now that blank. The thing I took away from it is blank. It changed how I approach blank from that point on. I would not trade the experience even though it was difficult.
Now let's talk about personal failures, things outside of work.
These require more care and conversation because they touch closer to identity and relationships.
There was a friendship I let lapse through pure neglect. A person who had been important to me in university, I kept meaning to reach out and I kept not doing it by the time I finally did. Too much time had passed and the moment was gone. We are politely friendly now, but not what we were.
What do you feel about that?
Regret, genuine regret, and a lesson that I have applied since relationships require attention, and if you tell yourself you will get around to it, you often do not. I reach out now when I think of someone rather than waiting for a convenient time.
I let a creative project go unfinished for 3 years. I had started something ambitious, a personal body of design work that mattered to me, and partway through I stopped. Fear mostly of finishing it and having it be worse than I imagined it could be.
That particular fear, the fear of finishing something in case the finished thing does not match the vision, is extremely common in creative work.
It took me a long time to understand that an imperfect finished thing is more valuable than a perfect unfinished one. I completed it eventually. It was not as good as my ideal version. It was much better than nothing.
Useful phrases for talking about personal failures. It is something I genuinely regret. I let something important slip and I could not get it back. I did not fully understand what I was losing until it was gone. Fear was what stopped me. If I am honest, I finished it eventually and it taught me something important about blank.
Now let's talk about how to share failure in conversation without it becoming heavy or demanding.
Because there is a version of sharing failure that feels like a confession that puts pressure on the listener, and a version that feels like honest self-reflection that invites real exchange.
The difference is often in framing and in length. Keep the story contained. Have a clear takeaway. Let the other person respond rather than filling all the space.
And match the depth to the context. A casual dinner conversation is not the place for a 40-minute account of your most painful professional failure.
The short version of any failure story is usually more effective anyway. Concise and honest lands better than detailed and exhaustive.
Useful phrases for keeping a failure story appropriately contained. The short version is blank. I will not go into all the details, but the main lesson was blank. It was a difficult period, but I came out of it with a clearer sense of blank. Looking back, it was one of the most useful experiences I have had, even though it did not feel that way at the time.
Now let's talk about how to respond when someone shares a failure with you, because receiving that kind of honesty well is also a skill.
The worst response is to immediately offer advice or a solution. Unless the person asked for your input, advice at that moment usually feels like dismissal.
Better to acknowledge first. That sounds like a genuinely hard experience. I imagine that was difficult to navigate. Thank you for sharing that. It is not always easy to talk about.
And then, if you want to invite more, what was the hardest part of it? Or, how did you find your way through it?
Both of those show genuine interest in the person's experience, rather than jumping to the lesson.
And if you want to connect over it, I had something similar happen actually. Or, I really relate to that. I had a period where blank.
Shared failure is one of the fastest ways to deepen a conversation.
Because it signals, I see you. I am not presenting only my best self here. You do not have to either.
Useful phrases for receiving someone's failure story. That sounds genuinely hard. I really relate to that. How did you find your way through it? Thank you for sharing that. I had a similar experience, actually. It was blank.
Now let's talk about the specific phrase, I should have known better.
This is interesting. It is one of the most common ways English speakers express regret about a mistake.
I should have known better than to agree to that timeline. I should have known better than to ignore those warning signs.
It is an honest phrase that simultaneously acknowledges the mistake and shows that you now have the knowledge you lacked before.
It implies growth. You know better now precisely because you made the mistake.
Another important phrase, in hindsight.
In hindsight, I should have asked more questions before signing. In hindsight, the signs were all there.
Hindsight means looking back from the present with knowledge you did not have at the time. It is a useful framing because it is honest about the limits of what you could have known in the moment.
And it is kinder to yourself than simply saying, I was stupid, which is almost never the accurate description.
Most mistakes are made with the information available at the time in conditions that made the wrong decision feel reasonable.
Understanding that is part of what makes a good failure story, not self-flagellation, honest analysis.
Useful phrases with hindsight. In hindsight, it is obvious that blank. Looking back, I can see that blank. At the time, it seemed like the right choice. Now I understand why it was not. I did not have the perspective then that I have now.
Let's close with something broader. The relationship between failure and identity.
In English-speaking cultures, and particularly in certain professional and startup environments, there is a strong narrative around failure as essential to growth.
Fail fast. Learn from failure. Every successful person has a list of failures.
This is both true and sometimes overstated. Failure is not automatically useful. You have to actually reflect on it and change something for it to become useful.
The reflection is what converts failure into experience.
And experience is what converts struggle into story.
When you can tell your failure story in English with honesty, ownership, and a genuine take-home, you are doing something that impresses people far more than a polished success story.
Because everyone has failures, only people who have actually processed them can talk about them well.
Vocabulary review. For types of failure: mistake failure, setback, regret, error in judgment, missed opportunity.
For owning failure, that was my decision. I underestimated. I ignored the signals. I knew something was wrong, but I should have known better.
For the lesson. What it taught me was I would not make that same decision again. It changed how I approach the thing I carried forward from it.
For the hindsight frame. In hindsight, looking back, at the time it seemed right. Now I understand.
For receiving someone else's failure story. That sounds genuinely hard. I really relate to that. How did you find your way through it? I had something similar.
And for keeping it contained, the short version is I will not go into all the details. It was difficult, but the main thing I took from it was,
your mistakes are part of your story. Tell them honestly with the ownership and the lesson they deserve.
And tell them in English. That is our challenge to you today.
We will see you tomorrow on Jamyy English. Keep going.
Take good care.
Let's also look at how to handle failure in specific conversational situations, because the context shapes how you tell the story.
In a job interview, for example, many interviewers ask directly, "Tell me about a time you failed." And this question genuinely trips people up.
Because people either choose something so trivial it is not convincing, or they choose something too serious and cannot frame it well.
The sweet spot is a real professional challenge that you handled imperfectly, reflected on, and changed your behavior because
the structure that works in that context, what the situation was, what you did, what went wrong, what you understood from it, what you changed.
5 steps all in the past except the last, which is present tense. I now do blank differently.
That present tense shift is important. It shows the interviewer that the story is not just about the past, it has current relevance.
Useful phrases for the interview version. There was a project where I underestimated blank, and the result was blank. I took responsibility for the outcome and spent time understanding what had gone wrong. What I changed as a result was blank. I now approach blank differently because of that experience.
Clean, owned, forward-looking. That is what a good interview, failure story sounds like.
Now, let's talk about a very specific kind of failure, the failure to communicate.
This comes up in relationship contexts, work contexts, friendship contexts, the moment where something went wrong, not because of a decision, but because of what was not said.
I once lost a good working relationship with a collaborator because I was not direct about a problem I was having with how the project was going. I let it build until it became resentment. By the time I said something, it was too late to resolve cleanly.
That is a communication failure rather than a competence failure.
And it taught me that small discomforts addressed early are much easier than large ones addressed late. I say things now when I should rather than when I feel ready.
Useful phrases for communication failures. The mistake was not saying something sooner. I let it go too long before addressing it. I was not direct when I should have been. I told myself it would resolve on its own, and it did not. I have learned to say things when they are small rather than waiting. Now let's talk about the courage it takes to admit a mistake in the moment, not in retrospect, but while it is happening.
This is harder in the moment. When something is going wrong and you are partly responsible, the impulse is often to minimize or deflect.
The most respected people in any professional environment are those who can say clearly in the moment, "I was wrong about this. Here is what I think we should do instead."
That combination is important. The acknowledgement plus the forward proposal. Not just "I was wrong," but "here is where I think we go now."
It shows that the mistake did not paralyze you.
Useful phrases for in the moment admission. I was wrong about this and I want to correct it. I need to change course here. I made an error in my earlier judgment. I should have flagged this sooner. I did not. And here is what I'd propose now. I got this wrong. Let me take responsibility for that and suggest a path forward.
Notice how all of those pair the acknowledgement with action. Admission without a path forward just creates anxiety. Admission with a path forward creates trust.
One final thought on failure. The difference between shame and regret.
Shame says, "I am bad." Regret says, "I did something I wish I had done differently."
Shame is about identity. Regret is about a specific action.
In English conversation and in healthy self-reflection, regret is the more useful framing because it leaves room for change.
Useful phrases that shift from shame toward regret. I wish I had handled that differently. That is not the decision I would make now. I can see clearly what I would do differently. I did not make the best choice, but I have learned from it.
All of those hold the experience without being defined by it.
Your failures do not define you. What you do with them does.
That is the story worth telling.
Thank you for being here today.
We will see you tomorrow on Jamyy English.